Good evening. Hello.
Hi there.
You all have children and you got out of the house. You're here. Welcome. And if you decide to sleep for a minute, we won't feel offended. We'll just see it as some self-care and self-regulation.
How many of you do have children? Raise your hand. There we go, virtually everyone. And would you say that these experiences of being a parent have been really easy and relaxed and not a challenge at all? Anyone say that? So one of the reasons that Tina and I take the time to not only work with parents, but then got together to write books about parents is because it's so challenging and sometimes just so confusing.
Yeah, it definitely is. And really, our kids are physically safer than they've ever been. We have car seats and we have all kinds of medical interventions that allow our kids to be physically safer than they have been in history. But we also are at a time where anxiety and depression and suicidality are really, really high in a way that our children are vulnerable and fragile in ways that we haven't seen for a long time. And so it is, and as parents, we worry about everything. We worry that we don't spend enough time with them, and we also at the same time worry we are spending too much time with them, right? We have these sort of irreconcilable fears, and this fear-based parenting can really drive us to make ourselves feel like we're failing all the time. And we're in this culture of hyper-parenting. You know, you've heard about helicopter parenting, yes? Well, I don't think that is an accurate descriptor anymore. Helicoptering is hovering. And what I think we are much more doing in our society now as parents is much more active and intrusive, on the ground involved than just hovering. In fact, you know, some people have called it snowplow parenting. I like to call it curling parenting, you know, where you're sweeping the ice, where there's no bumps for your child at all, and you're going before them in every way. I won't say who, because I don't think he would want to be credited with this, but a colleague of ours called it suppository parenting, because it's that intrusive. I'll tell you later who.
Okay.
But what's so interesting about this is, for some reason, we have come to believe that we have to be everything for our children and do everything for our children and provide everything for our children, including enrichment classes that make them more competitive to get into the better preschools and high schools and colleges. And we are quite misguided by thinking we have to do and be and provide everything for our children, because the science is really clear that that is not really what our children need from us. The science says that what our children need most for us is to show up. So tonight we're going to talk about what showing up looks like, what it means, what gets in the way of showing up, and you might have an idea that our digital devices might play a role in that to some degree.
Let me just check my text first.
Okay, good. We just got to make sure nothing important is happening.
That's right.
So yeah,
Nothing
it's a challenge.
more important
Nothing more
yeah.
important. But this is a challenging time, and we want to do right by our children. And what's so cool is that the science really does give us a North Star, something that can guide us when we don't know what to do, when we're not sure what the right thing to say is or what the right response is. There's something that won't answer every question, but one thing that's not always easy to do, but is very simple, and that is the idea of being present and showing up, particularly when our children need us.
And so as we are about to dive into, okay, well then how do I give my kid a secure attachment? I think it's really important to start with a really simple statement that hopefully you'll take in, and as we go through all this material, you'll be able to really get a feeling for it. There is no such thing as perfect parenting. There's no such thing as perfect parenting. So you may say, well, hold on, how can you say that when you've just said there's all these great things that secure attachment brings? Here's why we can say it. As Ed Tronick, a wonderful researcher in child development, speaks about it, as many other people do too, human relationships are what Ed calls messy. They're always full of disconnections and what in the scientific literature we call, it's kind of a harsh name, but it's ruptures. ruptures in the usually connecting, loving, attuned relationship. In fact, for a good part of the time, we're not tuned in and connecting, and all the ideal things that we're going to talk to you about don't happen. So what Ed has shown very powerfully is that you can repair, is the scientific term, those ruptures. We might say you can disconnect and then you can make sure you reconnect. And those reconnection experiences are what build resilience. So if you hear what we're about to say to you and say, oh my God, I didn't do that, this is terrible, terrible, I'm a terrible parent, then you're missing the message that says, in fact, that there can be these disconnections that are very painful. You as the adult in the relationship can realize this has happened, and then you can take the steps to make a reconnection happen. Those reconnecting experiences, and Ed might call them mismatch and repair is the scientific term, those cycles of disconnection and reconnection, in Ed's view, Edtronic, are actually what build resilience. Now, we're not going to ask you to intentionally make a rupture and start yelling and screaming at your kid. That happens enough for most of us as parents. So the issue instead is to say, when there is a challenging moment and you start feeling like, oh my God, I'm a terrible parent, you can, if you feel like it, beat yourself up, get really mad, say, didn't I take Tina and dance class and what's wrong with me? You know, but the fact is, it's you recognizing that something happened that wasn't in the direction that you wanted it to happen, taking a deep breath, having compassion for that inner experience, what some people might call self-compassion. I have a problem with that term, but the idea is that you direct compassion inwardly. The reason I have a problem with it is because we do othering too much, and to say that the self only exists in your body rather than in your relationships anyway is a fundamental problem we'll talk about later. So you won't hear me unless I get really, not lazy, but I mess up. I'll make a repair where I don't want to say self-compassion. It's inner compassion. So you want to have inner compassion because the compassion you need about the fact that ruptures happen allows your child to learn that things don't go always the way they could or should. And they learn from you. Wow, my parent was yelling or irritated or distracted and has come to me and said, you know, when that scary thing happened, tell me what that was like for you. And then they share what it was like. And they go, you know, I really understand that because I did something that I really shouldn't have done, yelling at the top of my lungs because I was so upset. That was really nice, and I see that you were scared. And this parent would be recognizing, as you'll see soon, that creating terror in your child without a repair, research shows, is one of the most devastating and negative, well, that's redundant, isn't it? Devastatingly, negatively impactful things you could do. There's lots of things we're going to talk about, and that's one of the most significant ones. So if you're sitting here going, well, I did that this morning, but isn't that what happened to me? Like, isn't that the way you raise a kid? And we're going to review the research that shows, sure, you know, 5 to 15% of the non-clinical population get raised that way, and we'll tell you what the outcome is, because it's not very good.
And I think one of the best parts about this is that the research is so hopeful. It's so exciting because, again, what Dan said, history is not destiny. And I don't know about y'all, but I have experiences and have had experiences as a parent where I act in a way where I'm like, where did that come from? Or why? I would never allow another human being to talk to my child the way I just talked to my child, right? And sometimes those experiences are because we're tired, because we haven't taken care of ourselves, because kids can be really annoying, and they might have been saying or doing things repeatedly that are really triggering for any human being, right? So those can be part of what's going on. But when we find ourselves reacting in ways that don't feel good to us or to our children, or we find that we have these triggers that happen over and over, those moments then become an invitation for us to say, what's that about? So one of the things that Dan and I will be talking about quite a bit is the idea of curiosity. and to really be curious about our own activation and overreactions that happen, curious about our history, curious about our children and their behavior and what they're communicating to us. And when we bring that curiosity, it allows us to really be in a more receptive space so that we can begin this making sense process. And by the way, the making sense process, or this idea of shining the light of awareness on our history so that we can not be driven by it, but we can really encompass it into who we are and make choices, is not a one-time thing, I'm sorry to tell you. It's, I remember one time I was teaching parenting from the inside out before we even wrote The Whole Brain Child, which I still adore that book so much.
That's a book I wrote with Mary Hartzell, which was our daughter, not Tina, but Caroline, my wife's, and my daughter's preschool director.
It's a beautiful book, and it's really about the making sense process and reflecting on our own histories. And I was teaching this book, and it was a parenting group. There were probably 12 or 15 moms in the room, and the woman who was hosting it, at the end of my workshop, I went to thank her. She was kind of cleaning up, and I went to thank her, and she was crying. And I just put my arm around her, and I said, what's happening? And she said, damn it. I went to therapy, and I thought I was done with all this. So she almost could bring humor to the moment, too, which was really lovely. But she's like, I did that. I sort of dealt with my childhood, I thought. But now that I have children, I keep finding more and more things that I have to work through. And so it's not a one-time thing. It's a journey of making sense. And when your children become teenagers and young adults and now adults, there are new opportunities to continue that making sense process as you think about what happened for me when I moved into that period of life, and how did my parents handle that? Did they show up for me? So I think let's maybe just start with this punchline, which is one of the best predictors for how well your children turn out is that they have secure attachment with at least one person. Some of you may be parenting on your own. Some of you may be parenting with a co-parent that you're married to or not married to. Some of you may be co-parenting with someone that you are most of the time not necessarily on the same page, but in the same book. And some of you are not at all in the same universe as your other co-parent. And all of those things are part of experiences we hear about all the time. So this science that says that really there needs to be one person who provides secure attachment, and that leads to all these wonderful outcomes. And we'll wrestle with and talk about the science behind why that is. What happens in the brain because of that one person? And then the second part, which Dan just beautifully began us with, is that the best predictor for how well we provide that to our children is not whether or not we had secure attachment, but rather how we have reflected on it and made sense of it. And we'll talk more about that and how we do that.
Yeah.